And now I would love to introduce Dhiraj. He is the co-founder of Shazam, one of the most downloaded apps in history. They sold it to Apple in 2018, which was crazy because Apple doesn't buy anything. But we met Dhiraj just a few months ago, and within 5 minutes of meeting him, it felt like we had known him for years. He is such a kind human, and when we decided to have a keynote presentation, I knew immediately that I wanted to ask Dhiraj to speak. He's going to talk a little bit about his journey at Shazam, but really focus on his impact investing, which is what inspires me about him so much. Since exiting Shazam, he has invested in over 70 female and diverse founders, which makes his personal mission align perfectly with Elevate. So please give it up for Dhiraj.
I'm so delighted to be here. I was able to celebrate my 55th birthday in Marbella a couple of days ago. Thank you very much. I've never been to Marbella before. I'm from India. I grew up all over the world. I lived in Paris and in Geneva and in Athens and in Singapore and in Tokyo. And to be here in this sunshine and with the warmth of the company that I felt was just fantastic. And the reason I'm here is not to talk about being old and foolish. It's about, I'm a recovering entrepreneur. When we started out at Shazam, the year was 2000, which feels like, just an age ago. And it was a time when Silicon Valley was just almost in its infancy. The Netscape browser had just been launched a few years ago. The technology boom was in full swing. Everyone and their dog wanted to be an entrepreneur. And that's how I fell into this game of starting a company. Now, my business partners and I, we just had this dream, this ambition, and I think I can relate to the entrepreneurs in the room who have an idea of building a business. We didn't even have an idea when we started out. We just wanted to be entrepreneurs. And so we'd go to the pub and just try to come up with something. And it was a miserable experience because it turns out if you're drinking and trying to ideate at the same time, it doesn't work. My business partner, Chris, he would hear music and he wouldn't know what the song was. And he always thought it would be fantastic if there was a way to find out. And that's how the idea for Shazam was born. To be able to use a mobile phone to identify music anywhere you go, whether it's on the radio or in a club or a bar or a pub. And that's how we started out. Now, I can go on for a long time telling you about the journey, which went from, we didn't even know, what domain of technology we were supposed to be involved with to try to invent this algorithm. It turns out it was digital signal processing. And the experts were at Stanford and Berkeley, right in the heart of Silicon Valley. We didn't actually have any music at all. So we had to create the database of music from scratch, building on CDs, which we encoded by hand in a gigantic warehouse. I'm being laughed at by the front row in the audience. We didn't have a business model. We thought we were going to sell CDs, but no one was buying CDs at the time. It was all about Napster and downloading music. And to cut a long story short, what ended up happening was that we were on the brink of bankruptcy. We raised $8.5 million just before the dot-com bubble burst, and we built a business which was deeply unprofitable and burning cash. And we were sitting there going, what do we do? And what we had to do was we had to sell the technology we had developed just to keep the lights on and just to keep going. And it was painful. People I had worked with from day one, people I'd spent like hours with, I had to lay them off just because we couldn't keep the lights on. And then something changed. And what changed was when the iPhone launched in 2007, and when the App Store launched in 2008, and Shazam became an app. And then people could use it on their new device, and Apple would advertise, like people didn't know what an app was. And they said, you can use this new thing to identify music wherever you go. And everything changed for us. And what changed was that for the first 10 years, people would forget, like, what's the number you need to dial to use this service? And it was a text message with the name of the song and the artist, which half the time wouldn't get delivered. And then when the app was launched, then things changed. It took us 10 years to get to the first billion times that Shazam was used. The next billion took just 1 year. And the next billion took 2 months after that. So it's just this crazy exponential growth, which came from finding the right experience for the user. And I remember this was in 2009. We were the first investment by a famous Silicon Valley venture capital firm called Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield and Byers. We were the first investment they made outside North America. And at the time, Al Gore was one of the partners at Kleiner Perkins. And he said, I want to come and do a talk for this little company that we've invested in across the pond. And we were really nervous. This is the former vice president of the United States coming to do a talk for a company which was roughly this size, about 100 people, a couple of hundred people. And I'll never forget when Al stood on stage and he told us about his vision, what he was concerned about, which was all about climate change. He had made a movie called An Inconvenient Truth, and this was his passion. And at the time, it wasn't even, it was called global warming. And it wasn't something which I was particularly aware of. But being in that audience and hearing his words and how invested he was in making the change he wanted to see happen, I'll never forget that. And that really changed things for me and made me understand the responsibility which we have for the actions that we take today and the future. The Shazam story has a happy ending. What ended up happening was when the usage took off and revenues finally started coming back in, we were able to buy back our technology, and we sold the business to Apple in 2018. But when I look back, it's just ridiculous because we started out aiming for overnight success. It took us 18 years to achieve that. It didn't work particularly well. But what I felt I was left with was this sense that actually, the best way to predict the future is to create it. We had the privilege to create that category, and I have the privilege of being invited to share my story here today because it still lives on. My brother, Mohit, works for the University of Peace in Costa Rica. And I spoke to some of his students, and I said, when do you expect to achieve peace? Is it going to be next week? Is it going to be next month? Like, no, we take a 20-year perspective. And, in a culture of impatience, in a culture of, overnight kind of building and creating, 20 years feels like a really long time. But I think that's what we're all signed up for. This is what we are, setting the stage for the future. I had another fantastic experience, which was hearing Paul Polman, who is the CEO of Unilever, sharing his thoughts. Now, Paul is somebody who is so open with his ideas. Not only did he lead Unilever as a company, fundamentally change the practices of the business, he also made sure that all the suppliers that were part of Unilever's supply chain changed their practices to be more sustainable, more inclusive, and encourage diversity. From Paul, I learned about the Sustainable Development Goals. Are people familiar with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? Okay, fantastic. It's 17 different areas that, as businesses and society, we can make a difference, from equality to addressing poverty to use of water. And the one which I'm particularly passionate about is climate action, which is number 13. Now, I wanted to do something which had an impact, which gave back, which was meaningful. But I didn't know where to start. It's a well-worn path for entrepreneurs to become investors. So I thought, okay, what do I do? I'd spent some time working for Save the Children after my time at Shazam because I wanted to do something which gave back. And that gave me a huge belief in the power of young people. So I thought, I know what, I'm going to ask some young people to help me out. So I organized a competition at the London School of Economics. I said, hey, I want to be an impact investor. But I know nothing about the domain. So let's start with renewable energy. Can people help me come up with some ideas and educate me about this domain? And this competition sort of went rogue. It escaped from London, and I had teams who were competing from Singapore all the way to Toronto. And looking at different domains like biomass and floating solar panels. And I had a couple of 19-year-olds who sent me an email in the middle of the competition and said, we're working on this geothermal energy domain, And there's a company in North America, which might be interesting for you, but they're raising a round now. If you want to get involved, you have to get involved now. So I sent the CEO an email. She responded right away. I did the due diligence, and I decided to invest. The company is called Dandelion Energy, and it's backed by Bill Gates' Breakthrough Energy Ventures, as well as Google Ventures. It came out of the Google X, the Moonshot factory. And what they're doing is they're drilling into the ground and using the heat of the earth to power homes, both for heating as well as cooling. And this was brilliant because it gave me my first introduction, if you will, but looking at the world from the eyes of young people and seeing the opportunities, the future is being created right in front of our eyes by a generation of entrepreneurs for whom it's not about building business. It's not about creating unicorns. It's about having impact. And that I find really powerful because it's hard enough to build a business. But then if you're trying to create impact at the same time, that's really challenging. And that's where I feel like some of my experiences, my stories, I can be a shoulder to cry on. I can be a cheerleader. And it's just sort of gone from there. When I interact with the next generation of entrepreneurs, I can feel this passion and this energy. I was at an event much like this at a place like the Pool, and a woman called Reham came up to me, and we started a conversation. And we were interrupted after 30 seconds. And she followed up, and she just persisted, which reminds me exactly of when I was an entrepreneur. And she's a neuroscientist from Oxford. Her partner is a computer scientist. And what they've developed is software which avoids unconscious bias in recruitment. Now, we all suffer from unconscious bias. It's not deliberate. It's because the patterns, and Razor referred to this earlier, so investors will use pattern matching. We were successful with a generation of young male entrepreneurs. That's not the right answer going forward. We've got to do what we can to open up opportunities for women, for minorities, for those who have neurodiverse, for instance. And I was privileged to join Mivite's board. This is in 2018, which grew in terms of being able to use artificial intelligence and augmented intelligence to match between a person's CV and the job description, to taking things like gender and race out of the equation. Now, this is a nice little story, and they've grown over the last 5 years to about 18 employees. Just last year, they signed the state of California as a client, with 250,000 employees. And this is so exciting for me to see that the tailwinds of trying to create a fairer workforce are being felt right here, right now. And I feel that this is fighting the good fight. Now, I'm often asked about what's my thesis, or what do I look for in my investments? How do I measure impact? But the reality is, for better or for worse, I feel like I'm led by emotion. I look for founders who are really passionate about what they're trying to do and what they want to create, because that's what it takes. At an early stage, you don't have a business plan. At Shazam, we never once hit our plan. Never once. We ruined I feel terrible now. Ajay, our chairman, he said, you ruined every single holiday for me because we lurched from crisis to crisis. But it had a happy ending. And it's the same thing, I think, when you start out, you can't really visualize the impact you're going to have over a long period of time. And through my investments, I call them postcards from the edge. It allows me to look into the future. It's a great privilege to be able to see the future through the eyes of this generation of entrepreneurs. And Steve Jobs had said in his address at Stanford's graduation, he said, stay young and stay foolish. I didn't listen to Steve Jobs. I've got old and foolish, as I said. But I think it's okay. I think it's okay. Because it's not about creating success. Creating success is something which is a dream. I'm not challenging that. What I feel like I'm getting is the opportunity of learning for a lifetime. And I think that's what legacies are built on. So if we look back at our lives, look back at the changes we've made, look back at what we stand for, if we have that opportunity to keep learning as we're going, I think that's a blessing. And that's why it's such a delight for me to be here, because I'm learning from every single conversation here at Elevate. I'm learning from every interaction, just speaking to Frederick, for instance, talking about what the pool is trying to do. And learning from people's dreams and hopes and passions. And that's the message which I want to leave you with. I wish you a lifetime of learning. Thank you very much. Thank you.